Well, as you guessed it, my message today is on Born of Water and Spirit. But before we begin, I have when I was in seminary, I had an instructor, and it was Religion 101, had made a comment to me that when we read Scripture or hear Scripture, we need to listen to it, but also find the underlining question. And today's Scripture does that for us. There is an underlining question. But this class that I had, the instructor gave us a test because it was on Nicodemus. And the instructor told us in the classroom, again, you must listen carefully and do the underlining question. So he said, clean off your desk, get a sheet of paper out. So I did, as well as the rest of the 36 students in the classroom. They all began to write their name in the upper right-hand corner. I just sat there. The instructor says, here's your test. The first question is there a name in the upper right-hand corner of your paper? I said no. And then he turns around, he says, and the second question of this test is, put your name in the upper right-hand corner. I said, okay. So I wrote my name. He says, now the third question of this test is, did you spell it correctly? I said no, because I didn't put the word it up there. Then he says, okay, for the final question, 50% of this test. He said Nicodemus had 7 shirts, 6 pair of pants, 5 pair of shoes. Spell all of that in 4 letters. Does anybody have an answer to that one? Nicodemus had 7 shirts, 6 pair of pants, 5 pair of shoes. Spell all of that in 4 letters. I heard something. What was that? T-H-A-T. Yes, that. The underlining question. See, he was teaching us to listen carefully, but to find the underlining question. His question was, spell all of that in 4 letters. And so that was kind of unique to be able to do. I immediately turned my paper in, and I was the only one out of 36 students that got an A, got them all done. So as we start thinking about that part in today's Scripture, I wanted to give a little update on that, how to get to it. And our Scriptures tells us a lot of things in our lives. And we see that Nicodemus here is just like us. He has some hard times in his life. He's become bored. He's become empty. And he seems to be doing things over and over again as we read the Scriptures. It's like a repetitive motion for him. And that he's just doing the motions, and he's lost that inner motivation. There's something that God and Jesus has. And you see, in our lives, we have those things today. There's a lot of things that we do. It's just those motions, and we've lost that inner motivation. And for example, jobs. How many of us go to work every day, year after year, 20 years, 40 years, doing the same thing? We go to work, we do this, we get done. We end up going through the motions, just the motions. And we lost that inner motivation which made us apply for that job that first couple of weeks where it's exciting. That first year is real exciting. You're going somewhere, but then all of a sudden after time, it's just the motions. We have that same thing when we go to school, and I'm sure you two can tell me that one. When you start the first part of the semester, you're there, you're excited. It's a new class, you got new friends, new teachers. You're learning something new, but when it gets to the end of the class, the last couple of weeks, you're going just through the motions, aren't you? Because you've been there. You've done that. There's nothing new to learn. Now you're wrapping it up. You're just going through the motions. That inner motivation is missing. We also find that in marriages. How many of us have been married for a long time that we realize after a while sometimes we're just going through the motions? When we got married, there was that fire, that passion, but it's still there, but not as predominant. It's not just jumping out at us every day. Because, like an example, Debbie and I have been married a while, and when she starts a sentence, within 2 minutes, I pretty much know where we're going to go with that sentence. good or bad, doesn't matter. I know where we're going to go. And so that is part of our things of going just through that motions. And so that passion's still there, but it's not lit like it used to be. So that's something we need to work on as we're going through life, is to continue our passion. Well, the final thing I'd like to point out is that church. How many of us are just going through the motion in life? How many people do that? They come to church every Sunday, sit in the same pew every Sunday, hear the same old songs every Sunday, read the same old bulletin every Sunday, meet the same old people every Sunday, sometimes hear the same old sermon every Sunday. It does happen. Some sermons are recycled. They're back. They're coming. It's the same thing. They're going through the motions. Some people do. They've lost that motivation, that thing that sparked them when they first came to church. And they find that something inside of them is not quite right. Their heart is just not alive anymore. So as we imagine these kind of things and think about these things in our lives, such as job, school, marriage, religion, they just keep becoming repetitious, stale, boring, same old, same old, same old. Well, that's where Jesus is telling us something different in our story today with Nicodemus. Because Nicodemus was a man going through the same thing. You know, you look at it, he's probably somebody around 60, 65 years old, gray hair. He's a prominent religious leader. He's distinguished. He's an accomplished man. He's trim. He has successful work. He's a teacher of the law, a professor at the temple of religion. And he's going through the same thing over and over. He's pretty much seen everything there's possible to see. Except one day, Jesus walks into the temple. He sees the passion, the fire, that inner motivation that Jesus has from God. And it's just the enthusiasm that Jesus has. So the story tells us Nicodemus goes to the house where Jesus is because he wants to know, how can he change? What can he do to make a difference? To get that motivation back? Well, when it says late, it was probably about midnight, because I figured Nicodemus didn't want to be seen by his fellow professors or religious leaders going to this new man in town. So he walked at night, and he walked up to the house where Jesus was staying and goes, of course, Jesus opens the door and says, yes. He says, I know it's late. My name is Nicodemus. I must talk. And Jesus says, great, let's take a walk. Well, again, Nicodemus didn't want to be seen. He says, can I come in? Well, we know Jesus is a great host, isn't he? He says, come on in, have a glass of wine. So Nicodemus comes in, walks in, and Jesus says, okay, what can I do for you? Well, Nicodemus, I know, explains to him, look, man, he says, I heard you preach. You have that fire, that passion in your heart. That's something that I'm missing. I don't have anymore. How can I get that? Because you see, I'm getting old. My lectures are stale. My sermons are boring. My life is dull. Well, Jesus, now he has that knack of looking into our hearts, doesn't he? Looks right at him and says, hey, Nicodemus, I know the problem. I know what your problem is. You need to be born again. Nicodemus goes, excuse me? He says, well, Nicodemus, you're not old. You're not tired. You're not boring. You have just fallen away from God. God's not the center of your heart. You need to be reborn, have the rebirth of the water and the Spirit. Nicodemus says, you can't be pushed back up in your mother's womb again. And Jesus said, no, you don't get it, do you?